Hey, Indie Express. I'm here with Alice Krieger and Anthony Fabian from Skin. Thanks for being with us.
It's a pleasure.
Hi.
Well, I had a chance to check out the film yesterday, and I have to say that it was one of, if not the best film that I've seen this year at AFI Dallas. So, congratulations. It was beautiful.
Thank you. I hope the jury agrees with you.
Yes, well, I think I'm a pretty good judge. Anyway, let me jump right in. Now, how did you come across this story to dive into it?
I had an interview with Sandra Lang, who's the subject of the film, back in July 2000, and it was on BBC Radio, and it was a very, very moving and fascinating story, and I knew there was a movie in there, so I literally got on a plane, went to meet her, and persuaded her to assign her life rights to me.
Wow. My goodness. Well, one of the things that's interesting is that it's a true story. And, Sandra Lang, she is an African American. Well, she appears African. She appears black, but she's born to white parents. So, can you explain what the parents do for our audience, just the premise of the story?
How is it that she looks black?
How is it?
Well, Alice, you probably have black genes.
Without doubt, my father's family has lived in South Africa since the early 1700s, and there's no way that I do not have a polygenetic makeup. I, without question, have African genes in my genetic profile, just because my family's lived there for so long. And I mean, the story is particularly interesting to me because I'm South African. I was born and raised there. Because, by chance, I was not Sandra, but I could have been.
Yeah, I mean,
And I
basically,
would have
yeah.
endured what she was subjected to.
The simple mechanism is that if you are carrying some black genes, so you have black ancestors, it's possible for your traits to appear white, but you're carrying black genes. And it might skip 2 or 3 generations. Suddenly, I think in this case, both parents were carrying enough black genes to create a child who was considerably darker and more marked in Africa in terms of her African traits than they were. It's one of the most extreme examples of this, but it's not unique by any means. There are lots of families in South Africa where you have a huge range of color within one family.
I'm glad that you explained that because even watching the film and you know that it's based on a true story, and yet you're looking at it and it doesn't add up in your mind. And you're like, really? Well, maybe it's going to come out later that she cheated on her husband or something happened.
What about when the second child is born, third child is born? Surely that's the moment when you, as an audience, say to yourself, well, it must be in their genes because they've produced another black child.
Right.
And you've seen the parents making love, so she's not making love with the vegetable seller. She's making love with her husband.
Right. No, those are the moments that sort of solidify in your mind. No, no, no. This happened. Now, growing up in South Africa, you did say that you felt close to this story. Had you ever delved into what it must have been like on the other side before this film came along?
Well, you knew growing up in South Africa, unless you had completely chosen, as many people did, to put your head in the sand. I mean, as an adolescent, I was acutely aware of the deprivation, but you really felt, or I felt, that there was very little that I could do about it without getting put in jail. And so I left. I left when I was 21, because I went to acting school when I was 21, and 3 years later, when it came to go back, I felt that I would either wind up in prison, which maybe I should have done. I mean, there's a part of me that thinks I chickened out and I should have gone back and joined the ANC, and without question I probably would have been imprisoned. Or do what I'm hope to accomplish now, is to go back and to work to benefit the country. I mean,
Rebuild the country.
yes.
Yeah, I mean, there's this huge split within South Africa between those who stayed and fought from the inside and those who left, and many of those who stayed felt that those who left had an easy option. Even if they were trying to fight from the outside, those in exile were not actually experiencing that danger of trying to fight from within. But there was a huge judgment on all South Africans, and you must have felt that as an exiled South African, kind of the world looking on you and saying there's something terribly wrong with your country.
The first time that I was not ashamed to acknowledge that I was South African was on the day that I stood in Trafalgar Square in London to vote for the ANC. And how old was I? I must have been in my late 30s or early 40s.
Well, it's fascinating that you were chosen to play this role, given that you are so closely tied to it.
It's not an accident.
It's not an accident.
No, but I'm immensely grateful to Tony because, you know, it could have gone so easily to someone else. In fact, well,
It
it
nearly
didn't.
did.
It nearly did.
Well, you did an absolutely spectacular job in the film portraying this woman from her earlier years throughout her entire life, that her entire age span. How did you go about researching this woman and connecting yourself to her?
It was interesting because I was playing a South African. Oddly enough, I had participated in a tiny, tiny film just prior, which I was a co-writer on, and in which I played a South African. But I had never played a South African in South Africa. And that was particularly interesting. It was also, and Tony noticed this, oddly difficult for me to play an Afrikaans South African who was a nationalist. And now we're getting into South African politics because that would have been the right-wing element of South African politics, the people who supported the nationalist government, who created the segregation. It was very difficult for me to, because I had spent my entire life feeling that these people were destroying this beautiful country, and then to actually have to find it within myself to sympathetically be her.
There was one point. I mean, Alice assured me that she would be able to get the accent because she had access to all the sounds, but she doesn't speak. Her natural speaking accent is not the Afrikaner way of speaking English. And I had asked her to speak in an Afrikaans accent all the time in order to help the other actors. And after about 2 or 3 days, she said, "I'm sorry, I just can't do it because what it does to me is psychologically align me with these people I've resisted all my life." Wow. So she was able to do it when she was in character, but she drew the line in terms of living that mentality all the time, you know.
But interestingly, I haven't spoken. I grew up in an Afrikaans community, although English was my home language, and so I got books of Afrikaans poetry and literature and started reading Afrikaans aloud again to myself, just to get that shape in my mouth. And oddly enough, this is weird, I didn't do a whole lot of research. Mm-hmm. I usually research exhaustively, but it was so close to my surface.
That's it. When meeting Alice for the first time, it was such a relief to me that she already understood every aspect of the script. I didn't have to explain the context to her because she's an exact contemporary of Sandra Lang. So she lived through that period year on year. She didn't have to research it because she lived it. And I think you did do something quite interesting though, didn't you? You looked at Sunny's astrological chart.
Yes.
And what did that open up?
It was extremely interesting. It described her as a very passionate and physical human being. Everything that happened to her was pretty much laid out there. And what was very, very interesting was that there are cycles in astrological charts, and there's the first 30-year cycle, the next 30-year cycle, and then the next one. And most people have died either at the end of their first 30-year cycle or through the next one. And we made the film at the very end of her last 30-year cycle. And the astrologer said to me, "You've completed Sunny's journey."
Wow, that's amazing. And that must give you a lot of confirmation and also just a sense of having done something bigger than yourself to.
Well, the stories always seem to me much bigger than just the simple story of this person. It has huge implications about what it means to be white or black, how we treat people who are different from ourselves, what it means to be a human being, what, the bonds of family. The implications of the film are vast, and I'm very attracted to stories that have a very personal, intimate feeling against a very important, large political canvas. And this story enabled me to tell, I think, a very big story about the history of a country and also the tribal nature of how we identify ourselves, how we need to discover a group that we belong to one way or another. And to tell that story through this very, very intimate family dynamic between a parent and parents and a child.
But not just parents and a child. I mean, what's fascinating is how, first of all, I wanted to ask how you got your cast together. I mean, it was beautiful that you really did capture this tribal feeling once Sandra left her parents, and I wanted to know how you went about doing that. Let's start with that one.
Well, it took a long time to get the film made. So I'm not South African, unlike Alice, so I had to do a lot of research myself, and I had to steep myself in the culture, and I had 7 years in which to do that, because that's how long it took from the moment I heard the interview to the cameras rolling. And I made a documentary in South Africa about 8 months after I found the story, which enabled me to spend a lot of time within the black community. It was about opera singers from the townships being given an opportunity to perform opera and music theatre for the first time. And I think that was my first window into all the different cultures, because South Africa has so many different cultures. And one of the fascinating things about the story is that Sandra goes on this really unique journey from living as a white person in a white community to then trying to live as a black person in a black community, not quite fitting in either, and then having to find her own place in the world where she does belong. So she inhabits these different cultures, and as a filmmaker it was very, very attractive to be able to show the Afrikaans community, show the African community, and show modern South Africa, where we hope that matters less.
But how were the South Africans that you came in contact with, were they supportive of this film? Were they sort of maybe embarrassed to show this side of themselves?
I think
What was the reaction?
there was a lot of shame, but also a great sense of catharsis, of being able to deal with these issues that had, in many ways, been the elephant in the room that can't be talked about. And I think we did workshops, and I found the crew enormously supportive. And the response to the film in South Africa has been tremendous. It's been shown in Parliament, for instance, and the ministers within government said every person in South Africa should see this film, because it represents our people, our history, and people must know about it. And it's incredible how quickly people forget very recent history. So they in fact immediately organized a second screening for all the ministers who hadn't been able to come to the first screening. And they said that they want the film to be shown in schools and, obviously throughout the country.
It's amazing. I mean, the film really, it does look so rich and it's so thorough, and you feel so attached to the different characters and your character, who we have mixed feelings toward. How did you, I know that you have to empathize with your character, but especially at the end, when she doesn't take her husband, I don't know how much to say, but how did you empathize with your character throughout her different choices?
I actually had enormous sympathy for her. To be an Afrikaans woman at that period in time was very difficult. You really were under the control of your husband. She would have had very little education. She worked in her husband's shop. That was all she was equipped to do. Divorce was not an option. If she had left her husband, she would have had no life. She would have been excommunicated. I mean, her community would have had nothing to do with her. Where would she have found a job? Where would she have found a home? She had no money. She would have had nothing. People say, how could she do? How could she make the choices that she made? I don't want to give the story away. She was in the most impossible position. And people get very damaged by that. She was trapped. Right. And what she does in the end is about being damaged and trapped.
It's interesting to look at her next to Sandra, who also in many ways felt trapped and made different choices. I have to let you go here in a moment. Unfortunately, I could talk about it for days. I really love the film. But I just want to ask, one of the notes that you put at the end was that Sandra, in real life, her brothers have still not contacted her. Has that changed since the film ended?
Well, I put that end note on the film really as a kind of provocation, because I hope to achieve that reconciliation. I think it's one more chapter in the story that needs to be written. I think it's going to be very, very hard for them to stay in the shadows once the film is released. There are many journalists who are trying to, or will want to bring them forward. And in fact, there's a new documentary that's just been commissioned by British Television, where obviously that's one of the goals of the documentary, is to try and achieve that reconciliation. And many people don't understand how it's possible for them to stay away. But the problem is that apartheid ended 16 years ago, 15 years ago, but the attitudes that existed then have not been erased. It's going to take at least another generation before people really begin to change. And all those children who are now at school in mixed schools are growing up with a much healthier sense of difference, you know, what that means. A lot of the people of the previous generation, such as Sandra's brothers, unfortunately, are still carrying the yoke of that system. Right. And it's going to take a really amazing transformation, I think, to bring them to the party, but I'm hoping it's going to happen.
Well, I thought that you portrayed them fairly, so if they wanted to come forward, it's not as though they're viewed as the bad guy by any means.
I'm glad you say that. I sort of phased them out of the story as it went along, because I was very aware that they might be watching one day. And I didn't want to have anything. There were early drafts of the script where they came in very negative at the end. But I think the way it is now, I think, as you say, there's the possibility for them to at least feel that there is a little door open for them to come.
Well, I hope so. That would be a very happy ending. Thank you both for being with us. Congratulations on an amazing film, and I hope that it is seen by many, many, many more people.
Thank you so much.
I'm Lara Berman for IndieExpress.com.